Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Christ in Me with Addie, where we seek to live out a John 3:30 life. John 3:30 says, "He must become greater and greater, and I less and less." Let's be real. In today's world, it can seem impossible to live out what the Bible calls us to do. Not only can it be hard to understand sometimes, but finding the time to read the Bible, to understand the Bible, to know the Bible, it can just be overwhelming. So I created this podcast so we could walk alongside each other, share some of our stories and struggles, but also where the Lord is bringing us, so that we can encourage one another and stay rooted in His Word. It's my prayer that you walk away from each episode saying, I know that is Christ in me. I know Christ in me. So let's get into today's topic. Hey guys, welcome back to Christ in Me with Addie. We're currently in season 2 of the podcast, and I'm just so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that you're taking time out of your schedule to just learn about God and to chat about Him with me. But I don't know what your schedule looks like right now, but mine is crazy. We're in like full send summer mode. This is kind of the time of year where like the 4th of July has passed. We're kind of approaching back to school season, and Saul and I, my husband, we don't have any kids yet, but this is the time of year that our schedules really pick up for some reason. It's like time to, the summer fun is starting to leave, and it's time to start focusing back on hunkering down before the holidays, which, being in ministry, we've actually already started some of our holiday prep, which is wild to say, but we have to prepare to provide, this amazing experience for families as they approach the holiday season as well. So full send summer. And in full honesty, guys, I'm out here trying to have a holy girl summer and not a hot girl summer. So I've been really trying to focus on getting back to the Lord, but pickleball has been calling my name, ice cream runs have been calling my name, sunset walks with my dog, vacation, grilling, all the things. I want to be anywhere but inside with a book in my hands. So I just want to say thanks for being here, because maybe you're feeling the same way. It's really hard to focus on God sometimes when we're in a busy season of life. But this podcast, it's by no means, I've said this before, a replacement for God's word. But what it is something that I hope is very easy for you to put on as you're driving to your next thing, or as you're just whatever you're doing, long car rides, maybe you're road tripping somewhere this summer, to just put Christ in me on and spend some dedicated time focusing on your own spiritual growth with God. And I have to say, even for me doing this podcast, having to heavily research these topics, that's really helped me grow. And you guys, in a way, are my accountability. And so I'm just so thankful that this has formed, that God placed on my heart to start a podcast, that He gave me a husband who can be the producer of the podcast. Like, He just aligned everything for us to be right here, right now, together today. So I just want to say welcome. Whether you're new or you've listened to the podcast time and time again, I'm just so grateful for you guys. I'm so grateful that there are people out there earnestly seeking God and answers in God. And maybe you're in a place right now where you're like not sure about this whole God thing. It seems a little weird, but you're curious. You want to believe in Him, but it just seems like a lot to figure out. And so I just want to say, so glad you're here. And that's where I started too. So I'm glad that we can learn and grow together. So yeah, busyness doesn't have to be a setback, but it can actually be a set up to help you get into some spiritual growth and formation this summer. You only grow as close to God as you want to be. And I have to remind myself of that all the time. Like, God is so readily available to us. And it's not that He goes anywhere, but oftentimes we actually are the ones to stray. And so I'm preaching to myself out here. But are you penciling God into your summer plans? And I'm seriously like speaking to myself right now, because my husband and I, we just went on a trip to Florida, and I told myself on vacation, I'm going to wake up early. I'm going to go watch the sunrise, just bask in God's creation with my Bible, and I'm going to read, and I'm going to feel so close to Him. That happened maybe once. You guys, in full honesty, that happened maybe once. But what I did find myself doing was praying a lot more as I walked on the beach, or reflecting on a verse about the waves as I looked at the waves. And so vacation from life doesn't have to mean vacation from God. And I just want to encourage you that different seasons might look different. Sometimes I'm really in depth, like studying the word, super hardcore, like deep theological ideas and all these things. And other times I'm like, God, my cup's a little empty and I need some encouragement, whatever that looks like. And so maybe sometimes it doesn't always look like hardcore studying as much as it just does looking like making sure you're remembering him in the course of your day to day, even if your schedule is busy or shifting or changing or on vacation. Vacation from life doesn't mean vacation from God. But there was nothing better for me on vacation than grabbing an iced coffee, digging my toes into the sand, and just soaking in all that God created. Like, wow, God, you really did all that, you know? But anyway, all that to say, I'm glad you're here and I'm glad you're listening and that you penciled Christ in me into your summer plans. And chances are, if you clicked on this episode, you have something very specific on your heart. And I'm not sure what that is, but if I said, God, I can't stop sinning from blank, your mind probably already filled in that blank. God, I can't stop sinning from this. I can't stop sinning from lying. I can't stop sinning from gossip. I can't stop sinning from going out and partying with my friends and getting too drunk or smoking weed and getting high. Or God, I can't break away from addiction. God, I can't stop sleeping with the person I'm dating. God, I can't stop sinning from blank. And it can feel so hopeless and helpless sometimes when you just keep repeating that sin, and it just feels like this never-ending cycle of a mistake and then guilt and then restarting, all to fall back into the same mistake followed by guilt and then restarting. And it's just this cycle. And you know, for me growing up, a lot of conversations I had around the idea of sin or mistakes or things like that was just don't do it. Just don't do it. I always heard, don't get drunk. Don't have sex, don't cuss, don't do drugs, don't cheat. And it was like, all I heard was don't. But what happens if I do? What happens in a moment of weakness that I make a mistake? Because I'm only human, right? Or worse, what if I keep doing it more than once and I know that I shouldn't? What if I get addicted? What if I can't stop? What if I want to break free, but it feels like I just can't on my own? Who can help me when it feels like something that I can't confess to anyone? What if my friends and family look at me differently? What if I lose their respect? What if this impacts my future? Is this hitting home for anyone? Maybe I'm really speaking to someone right now, and I hope that I am. But later in this episode, I'm going to share something that I've actually never admitted before on the podcast. And honestly, I think I've only really said it to my husband. But the reason that I'm going to share this is not because I want to clickbait you with personal details of my life. It's funny, like I'm actually, I would say, a private person, despite the fact that so much of my life is out online. But I think that's because I know how much a story can help others break free from shame. When we talk about where God has brought us in our life, it can really help others to feel like, one, they're not alone. And two, you know, you've walked through and experienced transformation in Christ, so you can speak to that experience. And so the reason that I'm going to share this sort of secret, I guess, that I have is because I carried the shame of this secret for a very long time, but I truly feel like there's freedom in sharing our stories in safe spaces, which is why I started this podcast to begin with. I wanted to hopefully resonate with people out there. I wanted to hopefully be able to speak to other broken or lonely or hurt hearts out there to know that God is so much greater and there's hope on the other side of adversity. There's so much joy on the other side of pain and in the journey. So maybe you're in a place where you feel like you're undeserving of God and his grace. And this episode is really going to speak to that, because I think a lot of times falling back into sin is a lot about how we view ourselves. You know, there's a quote, I forget who said it, but they say we typically accept the love that we believe we deserve. So if you feel like your partner isn't necessarily living up to your expectations, and this is more in the context of a dating relationship, you often date what you believe that you deserve. And if you don't believe that you deserve God's worthiness, if you don't believe that you deserve God's mercy and God's grace, chances are you're probably going to date someone who treats you the same. And so If you feel undeserving of God's grace because you can't stop falling back into sin, maybe it's even one specific sin that just has a stronghold on you, that's what we're going to talk about in today's episode. But first, I want to talk about the idea of sin in general. And I want to take some of the weirdness and the ickiness away from the word sin, because I think when we think of sin or even conviction, that's another churchy word that we'll get into, we feel like they're really bad things. And don't get me wrong, we know that sin produces death and belief in Jesus produces life. But I think when I first came to the faith, I was a little naive about the word sin. I started to become aware of what certain sins were that maybe I had been doing that I needed to correct and stop. But I was naive in believing that I would stop sinning once I accepted Jesus. And so when I did sin again after accepting Jesus, and it was an old sin that I actually fell back into, I was starting to question everything. Oh my gosh, am I really saved? Do I really love God? Is my faith strong because this happened again? And the thing is sin in itself is simply just choosing other than God's best. That's how I decide. That's how I define sin, is you choosing something other than God's best. And so for me to choose to sin again after I'd gone through this whole transformation of being saved and then being baptized and accepting Jesus and cleaning up my Instagram and starting to talk so much about Jesus, when I sinned again, I felt like the biggest hypocrite in the world. I felt like I was living a double life, like the life I wanted versus the life that I fell back into. And the thing is sin is simply just choosing other than God's best. Sin is something that comes naturally to us, and often choosing God's path is countercultural, but also counterintuitive to who we are as human beings. You can't not sin, basically, is what I'm trying to tell you in this. Sin reminds us of our deep need for Jesus, because if there's an opportunity to be selfish, we're going to do it. If there's an opportunity to seek personal gain, which I guess is the same as selfishness, we're going to do it. If there's an opportunity to go further than we should, we typically tend to do it. But sin has been something that has plagued the human heart since all the way back in Genesis with Adam and Eve, when they chose against God by eating of the tree in which God said not to. So where there's always been sin, there's always been choice. And where there's always been grace, there's always been choice. And so I think that's something to remember, is that God knows everything that you have already chosen, things that you are presently choosing, and everything that you're going to choose in the future. And I think about Judas in that example. God knew, Jesus knew that Judas walked beside him for 3 years as his friend. He literally called him friend and brother. Yet Judas turned Jesus in, and that is what began the crucifixion process. And so Jesus knows, God knows everything that you're going to choose, even against him at times, but yet he still calls you worthy and still extends you grace. And that's something to remember as we carry into this conversation. And the other thing to remember is that before sin even entered the world, in Genesis 1:31, after God created humans, it says, "And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good." God called humanity very good. If you looked at the world today, would you call it good? Would you call it very good? And if you looked at your life today and the decisions that you've made, would you call any of that good? If you answered no, congratulations, because you're a human. But if you answered yes, I will pray for you. Just kidding. But I mean, we all need God and we all make mistakes at times, right? I hope that you're happy with your life, that you look at it and you're like, yeah, this is good. This is good. But if you've ever looked back on something and you're like, not my finest hour, not my best decision, not my best moment, again, you're human. But only God has the authority to call anything good, because he's the source of all things good. Know that while sin distorts our goodness, God originally intended us to be nothing but good, pure, and close to him. So whatever sin that you're hoping to stop, whatever sin that's on your mind right now that you've convinced yourself you're not good, that you've convinced yourself you're not worthy, that you've convinced yourself you don't deserve grace. If you understand sin and all the things you wish to stop, why haven't you been able to? And that's a question I wrestled with for so long. I think for a while I didn't believe that I truly was worthy of God's grace. And until I accepted that, I couldn't break free from my sin. I wanted to believe that God too calls me good in his eyes, but I just didn't believe that I could get there while I still remained sinful, while I still continued to sin. And so my point in all of this is, whether you've accepted God or Jesus or not, you're always going to sin. But the question is, do you take your sin to him, or are you striving kind of in your own strength, trying to beat this on your own? The truth is we can't on our own. And that's why it becomes a cycle that we just feel like we can't break free from. I love the Daily Grace Company, and they do a Bible in a year podcast that I also do. And they recently said that sin is like a weed that opportunistically grows in good soil. Sin is like a weed that opportunistically grows in good soil. So the soil's good. There's nothing wrong with the soil, and things can grow in the soil. But the problem is that sin will grow even in what is good. Sin will grow even in what is good. In other words, without the knowledge of what is good, we can't spot the sin, the opportunistic or the counterfeit. So know and be encouraged that recognizing sin is the first step. And if you're here and if you're listening to this episode, it's probably because you recognize there's a sin you want to stop in your life, right? And that first step shows you that you have the knowledge of the goodness of God within you. That's exciting. You can identify the counterfeit. You see the counterfeit in your life. What's something you want to stop, and you're here today because you want to stop it. And the cool thing is that Paul, he's kind of the OG in the Bible. Paul was amazing. I mean, we'll get into details of his story, but he actually writes about this idea in Romans 7:7-8, which says, well, I'll give some context first. Some context to this verse is that Paul was a Jewish man of Jewish descent. And he was a Christian Jew, or a Messianic Jew. That's someone who was Jewish by culture, but also could be by religion. It can be an ethnicity or a religion, something to note. And Paul believed for the Jewish people coming to accept Jesus as their savior. But the problem was the Jewish people believed that the law, which think of like the 10 Commandments, do not kill, do not steal, do not covet. Those just kept expanding into all these sub-laws. The Jewish people believed that by following all of these religious laws that they made up the 10 Commandments and then also expanded upon to remain holy, quote unquote, and right before God, that in withholding these laws, they would be saved. But these laws started to become distorted, and people could use their power to actually take advantage of people. And Jesus came to correct this. Jesus came to show them that there was so much more than the law, and that Jesus was the only person who could perfectly fulfill the law without any selfish motives, without any power-hungry, self-seeking. Just, he did it right. Jesus did it right. And so Paul believed for the Jewish people to have their eyes open to who Jesus was. Jews believed that the law could save them instead of believing in the one who fulfilled the law perfectly, which was Jesus. So let's go to Romans 7:7-8. It says, Paul's writing, "What should we say then? Is the law sin? Absolutely not. On the contrary, I would not have known sin if it were not for the law. For example, I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, do not covet. And sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me coveting of every kind. For apart from the law, sin is dead." So what that verse is basically saying is that without the law, without the understanding of what God calls us to do, we would not understand what sin is. Because when we fall short of the law, because the only one who didn't was Jesus. So inevitably we as humans will. When we fall short of the law, that makes it known to us what sin is, but it also points to our deep need for Jesus. It's actually a good thing. It's a great thing. And it's an amazing thing when you have the awareness and the recognition of what God calls you to, where you fall short, and why you need Jesus. And so if you're here right now, it's because you recognize that there's a sin, maybe one specific one, maybe a lot of different ones, that you recognize you're falling short in. It just keeps happening. You can't get out of it. You're afraid. You're trying to figure it out. That shows that you have knowledge of what God says we should do. You have knowledge of identifying your sin, and that you know that there's a deep need for Jesus to get out of it. So let's talk about Paul for a second. Paul is considered like the guy for helping the gospel of Jesus spread as much as it did in the early church. He went around planting churches, raising up other disciples, training leaders, and he's considered one of the pillars of the faith. He is an OG, Paul. But something about Paul, very cool, but his name actually used to be Saul, and not so cool, he murdered Christians. Yep, you heard me right. He murdered Christians. Paul, formerly Saul, his whole life's mission was to silence Christians before he was saved. It says in Acts 8:3, but Saul was ravaging the church and entering house after house. He dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. So he was like full on persecuting Christians. But then he had a moment with God on the road to Damascus and completely gave his life over to Jesus. Have you had that moment with Jesus yet? Where suddenly your eyes were opened and you started to see things differently? Maybe you've already had that moment. Whatever your sin struggle is, maybe you've already had that moment where things just stopped being fun, I guess, for a moment. You stopped actually enjoying the sin and you realized, like, what am I doing? Because let's be real, sin at a lot of times is thrilling in the beginning until you see the dark roads it leads you down, or the wake of people that you've hurt in your trail, in your path. And you realize, man, I look at this so differently now. Saul had that moment. Going back to the topic of worthiness, Saul/Paul literally killed God's people. Yet God still said he was worthy. God still gave him grace. And not just that, but he redeemed him and welcomed him with open arms when he ran to God for forgiveness. It says that scales were removed from his eyes. Have you ever felt like that? Like this covering just comes off your eyes and you're like, God, I see this so differently now. And I just fall at your feet. I'm so sorry, because I've certainly had that moment. I've absolutely had that moment where I look back and I'm even like, God, I'm embarrassed that I thought I was doing the right thing. And in hindsight, wow, I was so wrong. I was so wrong, God. So why do we worry whether or not God will accept us when we run to him for forgiveness? Maybe you're worried about the people in your life accepting you after you confess your sin struggle. And the truth is, not everyone will, unfortunately. But God tells us to forgive others as we have been forgiven. We can't always control how others will respond, but we know how God will respond, and that's in love and grace. And his opinion, truthfully, is the main one that matters. Could you imagine what it must have been like for Saul, having killed Christians, then to try and be Paul, because God said, you're no longer Saul, the old has passed away and the new has come. You are now Paul. I give you a new name, a new identity in Christ. But for Paul to become a member of the Christian community, I'm sure many rejected him at first. I'm sure he had to face people whose loved ones he even possibly killed or put in prison, and still be there and be like, well, God put me here now, and I'm sorry. And yeah, I did that wrong, but I'm here now and I'm trying my best. And the thing is we don't have to earn favor with God. And I just love that. So no matter your sin struggle, even if other people don't understand, the better thing to do is to bring it to God, bring it to the light, because the things that remain in darkness are the things that Satan will use to hold you in your shame, to hold you in that lowly place, to keep you stuck in your sin cycle and convinced that you could never become anything more. But that's just not true. And we see that here with Saul becoming Paul. Other people's pain is valid. And I hope that Paul asked for forgiveness from others if he did hurt others. But ultimately, this shouldn't keep us from making things right with God and others. That's step number one. If you're stuck in your sin cycle, how can you make things right with God and others? Maybe the sin you're struggling with is consistently hurting others. But if Saul, who became Paul, could literally go from hurting others to becoming one of the pillars of spreading the good news of Jesus, why do you not believe that the same grace will be extended to you? Paul understood what it was like to wrestle with sin and worth and feeling worthy enough. Paul understood what it was like to want to do good, but to constantly fall short and have to fight off that mental struggle of, am I even enough? He writes in Romans 17 through 25, "For I do not understand what I am doing, because I do not practice what I want to do, but I do what I hate." Have you ever heard that saying, don't hate the sinner, hate the sin? You can hear Paul's agony here. He's saying, I don't understand what I'm doing because I don't practice what I know you're asking me to do, God. I can't do it. I'm doing what I hate. And maybe you feel that way in your sin struggle. Each time after you commit this sin, you feel again why do I keep doing what I hate, God? Help me get out of this. But he says in verse 18, "For the desire to do what is good is in me, but there is no ability to do it. For I do not do the good that I want to do, but I practice the evil that I do not want to do." Verse 20, "Now if I do what I do not want, I am no longer the one that does it, but it is the sin that lives in me." Verse 23, "But I see a different law in the parts of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and taking me prisoner to the law of sin in the parts of my body. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body of death?" Have you ever had that dialogue with yourself in your mind after falling to sin again? Sure, his words were a little bit more olden day, what a wretched man I am, but I really resonate with that. Sometimes after I sin, I'm like, I'm terrible, God. I'm horrible. I don't belong in ministry anymore. I should stop doing a podcast then, God, if I can't stop from sinning. How can I sit here and talk about sin if I'm falling into sin? And it's so easy to allow that spiral of, I'm not enough. I'm doing it wrong. I don't deserve to be here. And the thing is, you can sit here a million times over and go, gosh, what the heck is wrong with me? Why do I keep messing up so badly? God, won't you help me stop from doing this? God, did you mean to send somebody else who's stronger, who's better? But let's look at the next verse and see how Paul goes from groaning to giving glory to God. And I think, again, this is that mindset shift where we can choose to go from groaning to focusing on the glory of God. And I also just want to say too that we read in verse 23 that Paul describes this feeling of wrestling with what I know I should do, but I just can't get it right, God, as waging war in his mind. He felt war in his mind over this. But in verse 25, he says, "Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then with my mind, and I myself am serving the law of God, but with my flesh, the law of sin." Paul acknowledges here that it's because of Jesus that we are made right before God, not in our inability to stop sinning. Paul is acknowledging here that it's through Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, focusing on him in our mind, that we are able to serve the law of God. Again, the Jews couldn't perfectly fulfill the law of God, but when Jesus came, belief in him is what fulfilled the law. It says, though, in verse 25, "with my flesh, the law of sin." So that's that part where you feel like, I just can't stop doing this. It's because our body is naturally inclined to want things against the goodness of God. Let's carry on in this. It's our natural inclination to always be in sin. It comes natural in us. But what also comes natural to us once we have the awareness of God is to want to do good, but to still choose against it time and time again. So what's the cure? What's the fix? How do I remove this guilt and shame and break the cycle? Romans 8:1, this is Paul. He says, therefore, there is now no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. Hear that. I want you to really hear that. If you have accepted Jesus and bring your struggles to him, and not just bring it to him, but like actually believe that he can help you stop it, he's not condemning you. He's not looking at you differently. He's with you. He said there is now no condemnation. There is now no shame, no guilt, no blame, no list of your wrongdoings, no record of your wrongs for those in Christ Jesus. It says in verse 5, for those who live according to the flesh have their minds set on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit have their minds set on things of the Spirit. If you keep focusing on your sin and not the Savior, you're always going to fall back into sin. I'm going to say that again. If you keep focusing on your sin and not the Savior, you're always going to fall back into your sin. What if instead of constantly beating ourselves up for our sin struggle, we intentionally decided to believe in our salvation more? Don't get me wrong here. I need to be really clear about one thing. I'm not saying that you can just keep sinning time and time again and being like, oh, God forgives me. But what I am saying is that if you're stuck in a sin cycle, if you're stuck in that guilt and shame, and if you're feeling like you are so unworthy of God's love, what I am saying is that if you focus more on God and who He is and less on who you are not, and you ask him for forgiveness and you ask him for his strength, he is going to help you. The reason that you feel so helpless and so hopeless as you reflect on your shortcomings is right here. It says in verse 6, now the mind set on the flesh is death, but the mind set on the Spirit is life and peace. If you're focusing on your flesh, your body, all the things that you in your own strength continually fall back into sin on, that's death. There is no good that can come from that. But if you focus on God and the Spirit of God indwelling within you, that is life and peace. Those who are in the flesh, this is verse 8, those who are in the flesh cannot please God. Those who are in the flesh cannot please God. Do you hear that? Focusing on all the things you're doing wrong does not please God. He doesn't want that for you. He wants life and peace. Verse 9, you, however, are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit. You are in the Spirit, guys, like the Holy Spirit. This is the Holy Spirit who reminds us of the goodness of God when we're sinning, and we know it because the Holy Spirit gently nudges us through conviction that we aren't living in God's best. I think I've shared this before, but there's a song called Mercy of God by the Belonging Co., and this is verse 2 of the song. I'm not going to sing it, but I will read it. It says, you love through conviction, reveal what is hidden, the thoughts and decisions that I cover up. It's never to hurt me. It's how you preserve me. I'm welcome and worthy by the mercy of God. Guys, conviction isn't condemnation. Conviction is mercy. And if you're not sure what conviction is, it's probably why you're here today and why you clicked on this episode. Conviction is when God is nudging you that you're not living in His best. Maybe you're in a relationship and suddenly it's not just that he gives you the ick or that she gives you the ick, but suddenly you're starting to see it differently. You're starting to want different things. You're starting to maybe want to hold off on doing anything intimate until marriage. Maybe things about you are changing, your morality is changing, and it's just not the same. That's conviction. Or maybe you keep going out to the bar on Saturday night and missing church every Sunday, and you just feel this nudging in your heart like, I know I'm supposed to be at church on Sunday. I know I'm supposed to be there, but I just can't stop going out with my friends. That knowledge of knowing what you should be doing is conviction and God trying to redirect you. It says in that song, you love through conviction. It's never to hurt me. It's how you preserve me. I'm welcome and worthy by the mercy of God. I've said this before, but we have to kind of think of the Holy Spirit convicting us as like a friend telling another friend, like, hey, there's something stuck in your teeth. It's loving to tell them so they can remove it. And similarly, the Holy Spirit does that for us gently and lovingly so that we can clean it up. All right, guys, are you still with me? I know we spent a lot of time on what conviction is and what to do when we know we're stuck in sin, but let's talk about how, because you're probably wondering that now is, all right, you got me convinced, Addie, that I'm in this sin cycle, that I'm worthy of God's love and his grace, but how do I stop this sin cycle? Paul tells us that the solution is the Spirit. Like, really accept that today, friend. The solution is the Spirit. Like, the solution is surrender. The solution is surrender to God. The solution isn't striving harder to be stronger, to be better, to be more good. The solution is desperately relying on the strength of the Spirit, desperately surrendering your situation over to the strength of the Spirit. And my question to you is, are you desperate for God to help you overcome this? Are you desperate? I know for me, when I was stuck in my sin struggle, I often fell back into the sin struggle because I would go through this season of like, yes, I'm desperate for you, God. But when I got impatient or I didn't want to sit in the pain of actually having to transform myself in my life and having to change, because that's the thing is, if you are desperate for God, he's going to bring you a solution that looks different than what you've been stuck in, than the sin cycle you've been stuck in. He's going to remove people. He's going to remove things. He might remove your job. Like, you just don't know. He could change anything, and you have to be willing to accept what he brings as the solution. And what I love about 1 Corinthians 10:13, it says, no temptation, so no sin, no temptation to sin, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. So acknowledge that there he's saying it's common for mankind to fall into temptation, to fall into sin. You're not alone, you're human. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. It's right here. Are you desperate for God? Are you desperate for his way out? Are you surrendering to his way out? Not your plan, not your will, not what you think is best, but his way out. Nothing you're facing right now, like I said, is uncommon to mankind. Nothing you have done, are doing, or will ever do will surprise God. I said this, even Judas walked with God for 3 years with Jesus, the Son of God, yet he still betrayed him, and Jesus let him walk alongside him and still called him friend. But it says that when you fall into sin, whether you've done it once or 1,000 times, when you are tempted, he will provide a way out so you can endure it. The ways out God has for us are sometimes invisible to us because they are impossible for us in our own strength. Think about it for a second. I'm going to say that again. The ways out that God has for us are oftentimes invisible to us because they are impossible for us in our own strength. Moses was desperate for God, and God parted a sea. Jonah was desperately running away from God, and God helped him find a way out when he found his way in to the belly of a whale. What if the way God is opening up for you to break free from your sin you're struggling with is a way you never imagined? Again, are you desperate enough to let God do the impossible? Or are you desperately still trying in your own strength? Okay. Story time. Here's that confession I told you I was going to share. So I've talked about this in my testimony episode, and this will give you more context if you want to go back and listen to my testimony episode. But I want to tell a story about my sin cycle and my naiveness, is that a word? With sin and just what happened once you became Christian. But I haven't told this part of my story before. But when I first came to the faith, this is all my testimony episode, but I felt a conviction to break up with the boyfriend of like 3-4 years that I was living with, because I started to see it differently. I started to understand, okay, I don't think I'm supposed to live with someone before marriage, and I'm starting to see why now. And I'm really scared, God, because I still loved him at the time. I mean, I was fully convinced in my mind that I could move out and we could somehow work it out, and that he would also come to this great knowledge of Christ, and that it would just be this growing together. And that's not what God had planned. He was like, oh, Addie, but he's so gentle. He's so tender. He's so loving. And he let me think that. I just was willing, and I let him lead the rest. And honestly, the plan turned out so much better than I could have expected. And so basically what happened was I started living with some Christian friends, and they were great accountability for me. I couldn't bring a guy home. I couldn't come home drunk. Things that I probably would have done before were no longer options to me, because I was not only on this new life and new path with God, but when I had those moments of weakness, of wanting to fall back into my sin struggle, I couldn't really, because I had the accountability of living with them, and I didn't want to disappoint them. And I'm so grateful for that, because in hindsight, that really accelerated my spiritual growth process. But there was a moment that is probably one of my greatest regrets, but also one of my biggest learning moments. I was about 3 months into being a Christian. I was, had accepted Jesus into my heart. I was on the fast track of just learning and growing in him. And my ex reached back out to me after 3 months. And to be completely honest, he was my only family. He was my whole life. And I had missed him. Absolutely. And I was going through all these changes in my life. I was so unsure about everything. I was following God and seeking God, and that was all great. But at the same time, it was all new. So I had this uncertainty and this worry. And long story short, we did fall back into sexual sin together. And I just remember after it happened, going back home to where I was living with my Christian friends at the time and thinking, I'm not really saved. I did it again, God. I fell right back into, I'm supposed to be new now. I'm supposed to be different. I'm supposed to be changed. And I did it again, Lord. So is the cycle broken? Am I new? And I remember I kept it a secret. Luckily, I hadn't fallen back into it again, and I remained. I tell this in my testimony episode too, but I bought a new mattress. I hung a verse above my bed, and I said, okay, God, right here, right now, you are my accountability. I'm making a pact with you that I will remain new. I will remain pure. I will dedicate myself to you until marriage. Lord, I need your strength. And so struggling with sin can cause us to question, am I really saved? But Paul even answers this. He's like that good old grandpappy in the faith who knew we would all go through this crazy sin struggle, from sin to faith to grace to guilt, this roller coaster. And he wrote about it in Romans 10:9. It says, because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Let's look at that. If you have said, I believe in Jesus, I believe it to be true, those who believe something typically live it out. So then you'll be saved. If you're confessing, I believe in you, Jesus, as Lord, I believe it in my heart. And if your heart truly believes in something, it's going to live it out. And so me getting that new mattress, me hanging the verse above my bed, that was me actionably living out. I end this sin cycle right now, this sin struggle right now, right here, today with you, God. I believe I am worthy of redemption. I believe I'm worthy of someone waiting with me until marriage, because that's what you plan for me, God. I believe in your plan, your goodness, your way is best, God. And I just ask right here, right now, that no temptation overtake me, and that I can endure with you, Lord, your strength, your spirit. I surrender my struggle over to your strength, your spirit, God. Inhabit my life and help me break free of this sin struggle. I tell you that story because, again, I was naive in thinking that because I had made this big declaration of faith, that nothing bad would ever happen again. I would never fall back into that sin specifically again, and that I was good. But the truth is, I was wrong in thinking that about my own self and my own strength. That when the temptation re-arose, I was thinking I was like, quote unquote, cured of ever falling back into sin again. That just isn't the case. And this points to our deep, desperate need for Jesus every single day of our lives. Romans 5:15 says, "But the gift is not like the trespass. For if the many died by the trespass of one man, how much more did God's grace and the gift that came by the grace of one man, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many?" I want you to carry that with you this week. Romans 5:15, the gift is not like the trespass. The one thing that you do not earn as a result of your sin is condemnation from God. The gift of his forgiveness, the gift of his grace, the gift of his mercy is not like your trespass, your sin. It comes either way. The question is, are you desperate enough to give your sin struggle over to God, to say, God, I want this cycle to end. Show me your way out for me. I hope this episode encouraged you guys. I don't have all the answers, and I really want to say that. I know that I talk a lot about my story and where God led me and the way out he provided for me, but it's going to look different for you. But I can speak to the fact that for me, it started with, number one, acknowledging that I needed to see myself the way God saw me, and that was worthy of grace, worthy of mercy, because the gift is not like the trespass. He extends it anyway. We're going to continue to sin for the rest of our life. But two, are you surrendering it over to God, asking for forgiveness? And three, are you trusting and waiting for his way out for you? I hope this encouraged your heart today. No matter what you're struggling with, you are so loved by God. If you need prayer, if you have anything you'd like to talk to me about, reach out to me at Addie on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you guys, and I'll see you next time on Christ in Me with Addie.